Welcome, everyone. It's such a beautiful sunny afternoon. I don't know, we're taking bets whether or not it's going to snow tomorrow. That's what the weather forecast says. We could get snowflakes. I'm saying no, it can't happen. Thank you all very much for being here this afternoon for our Science Café. We're very excited to have Don Kent with us, who is the president and CEO of the Schoodic Institute. And Schoodic has been a wonderful collaborator partner with the MDI Biolab over the years. Most recently, we just held a winter retreat for our faculty there in February in the middle of a blizzard, so that was fun. But it was a great opportunity, nice, beautiful location, quiet setting, a perfect spot for our faculty and our new president to come together and really do some strategic planning. So we're really grateful to have them as our neighbors across the bay and partners in good work in terms of environmental conservation. So that's what Don's going to talk with us about today, is a little bit about sort of what the next generation of environmental conservation looks like in parks and in communities. And for those of you that don't know, Don's been the president of Schoodic Institute since January 2018, so about a year and a half, I think. So he should know, he should have all the answers to any questions that you ask him. And before that, he's worked in a variety of environmental conservation organizations over the years. And so he has a lot of great experience, and we're excited to hear what he has to say. So Don, welcome.
Thank you. So I was told I could just come here and you talk to me and we could get to know each other. So I'll ad-lib this whole thing. Yeah. So can you hear me? Is this good or else that? All right, yeah. I'm not going to speak for all of conservation. I tend to come at things from a different angle. So when I say next gen, transformational, you can't blame anybody else. It's all on me, the way it's going. So what I thought we would do is I will give you a little bit. I want to talk to you first to give you some context to where we're coming from. So I'll talk with the why and the how. And then I'd like to get a conversation going because there's lots we can talk about, lots I want to talk about. And in case you don't start jumping out of your seats with questions, I actually have cards with words on them, which we can use as a prop to get us talking about things. And I'll give you a card and you can take a look at it and go, what the heck is that? And we'll get a conversation going. So there's your warning. You've been warned. We're going to be different. So as individuals, my experience is almost all of you are going to you want to make the world better in some way, whether it's your job, it's your pastime, it's what you do in between innings at the Red Sox game. You're thinking, how could the world be a better place? Or you're watching CNN and ripping your hair out going, how can the world be a better place? So that's a common attitude. When you take that attitude of making the world a better place and building an organization around it, you've transformed into a business. And now there's a lot of things that have to come into play. It's no longer I can just sit here in my recliner and we're good. Now you've got to do something with it. So we're all trying to make the world better in some way. As an organization, as many nonprofits, we have nonprofits who are trying to make the world better by healthcare. The Gates Foundation pours hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into healthcare throughout the world. Some people are working with just clean water. Some people are working with food security. So there's lots of ways to go about making the world a better place. We think at Schoodic that one of our reasons we focus on the environment is in part because we're partners of the park, and when the park was trying to think, what do we do with this property over here that the Navy is walking away from, it made more sense about how do we support parks. So that was the beginning of it. But even with that, there's lots to work with. There's dirty water, and there's lots of ways to go with the environment. What caught our interest is change. And the dramatic changes that are going on right now. We just had the report come out from the IBPES, International Bureau for Biodiversity. I can't even get through there. But the latest startling news, we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction within the next decade or two if we don't do something about it. That's just astounding, but that's just the latest piece of news. We've been doing this for a long time. We've been developing our world and that in itself is not a negative. People need a place to live. They need food. They need a place to go to work. They need Starbucks on the way in to work. So all of those things are beneficial to us, and we find them important. They're worth about 70, 80 trillion dollars a year when we roll up all the countries, the domestic product of all the countries. So it's a big deal. It drives our economy. It gives us life. Lets us go see a play on Broadway. All of that's good. You know, sometimes we need a change from walking through Acadia National Park. Some people need a change from walking through Acadia National Park. Others are content to do it every day. So, but things are changing. So what's happening? We went willy-nilly down this road where, you know, development was good. Let's build out, let's build out, let's build out. Let's do factory farming, let's do all of that stuff. But we stopped to recognize that the natural world is of high value too. The value of the natural world, if you put a dollar on it, is anywhere between 35 and 125 trillion dollars per year. So even if you're just stuck in economy and you don't want to talk about, you know, it cleans my water and the soil's revitalized and all that stuff, that the ecosystem functions we have, there's a lot at stake here. So as investors, as a human race, we should be investing in that value that's in the natural environment. And we haven't. So we've got change. The biggest change is climate change. It's driving most things. We still have disturbance, local disturbances or expanded growth from cities and so forth, but climate change is a big driver here. So at Schoodic Institute, we want to save the world. We found our niche has to do with the natural environment, and we want to make that natural environment sustainable. That's our goal. So even then, there's different ways to go about that. So we are interested in an end product which is sustainable natural resources. How do we get there? If we want sustainable natural resources, in the past, what we've tried to do is we've developed regulations and say, don't do that. Or we've set aside land, we protected land. Or we've educated people. Or we've done all three of those. And a lot of that's been really effective. We have an amazing National Park Service, but it doesn't cover the entire planet. The problem with all of those, the limitations, I hate to call them problems because they've all been really effective, but the limitations to those approaches to regulation, to buying up land, to education, is that they haven't solved the problem yet in and of themselves. You know, the truth is that we probably don't come from the perspective of a lot of people on this planet, which is my choice is not to mess with that environment or it's to eat. And at the end of the day, eating comes first. So there's sacrifices to be made to the environment. I need shelter. I'm going to sacrifice the environment. It doesn't make me bad. It doesn't mean I hate the environment. It just means there are choices to be made, and I have to make those choices. They're difficult choices, but I'm going to make them. So something else needs to happen here, and that's to help people understand the value of the resource and not just value at that minute, but value long term. Again, in that minute, if you're hungry and your kids are crying, you don't care what it looks like 10 years from now. But we have to get that process started. So mixed in with this, so biology science cannot be just scientists running around doing their science. This is much bigger than science, much, much bigger. So if our goal is to get to sustainable environmental resources, we know that that requires everybody, or darn near everybody, understanding the value of the resource and how to work with it in a way that's sustainable. All right? So how do we get there? How do we get people to think about being good stewards of the environment? Well, we need to communicate with them. How do we communicate to them, and what are we communicating about? Well, communication is a tricky thing. Our brain, I pick on our brain all the time. Our brain is still evolving. It hasn't been that long since we got up on two legs. We haven't been out of the forest that long. are off the savannas, and our brain takes a long time to evolve. As much as we would like to think we've reached maturity in our brain, we still have a lot of flaws. So one of the things we still rely on quite a bit is evolutionarily the mid part of our brain, the part that does almost all of our work, said, oh, there's a saber-toothed tiger. Oh, I just saw my pal get eaten by that saber-toothed tiger. Oh, when I see saber-toothed tigers, I should run and hide, okay? Dopamine, bang, it's in my head. I don't have to think about it. When I see a saber-tooth, I don't have to go through the whole process again and go, I wonder if that cat's okay, or if he's edible, or maybe I can pat him. No, oh no. Wired, run, go hide someplace. And 90% or more, some people say we're at 100% now, or darn near 100%, of our brain's activity is rote. I learned it, I got the right feedback, I got dopamine, whoo, I got a little push, and it's there. So the problem we have is that historically education or advocacy has been, hey, climate change is bad, you need to change the way you live your life, you should recycle, you should stop using gasoline-powered engines, you should be, careful with your cows out back and make sure they don't have any gas. And where does that get us? Most people go, yeah, I believe that already, you don't have to convince me, but usually it's, yeah, great, thanks, see ya. I'm closing my door now, I'm not giving. Because we haven't overridden the system, that's working for us. So to get to the cortex of our brain requires a different approach, and it requires discovery. People's brains will rewire if they discover something different than they're looking at now. So back to Schoodic, we're communicating through education that is focused on hands-on opportunities, discovery opportunities. We know we just can't stand to preach to people. We're not going to make it if we just preach at people. So what we're trying to do is give people a chance to discover for themselves. So there's citizen science going on. There's techs, interns, any kind of thing. We work with the students. We can get into some of this later. Give them a chance to do something, whether it's students or it's adults. Give people a chance. You're working with a clammer or a lobsterman who typically look at an academic and say, you got nothing for me. See ya, you don't get my life. But if you work with them in a way that we're discovering together, they'll get it. So what are we discovering? You can't just educate, you just can't create opportunities. You have to have a chance to discover what, and where's that come in? That comes into science. So the basis for us is science. We're doing research that's looking at change, because change is the gigantic issue that we thought we would tackle right now. So by doing science, that creates opportunities for discovery. So we're designing projects, science projects, that bring people into the process up front, not at the back end when we're just telling them what we discovered, but the goal is to bring them into the front end so they can take ownership of it. We've heard that term before. Give me ownership of this and I'll back you up. So let's create some ownership up front. Let's help them discover it for themselves. That means we've done science to develop the facts. We can come to agreement on what the reality is. We've transferred that to somebody who would not normally have it. They've now learned. And now that we've communicated to them in an effective way that they can think about, maybe this environmental stewardship is not such a bad thing. So that's the context of where we are at Schoodic right now. That's the framework. But there's lots and lots of things going on. And I'd like to, instead of just standing and lecturing to you about what we're doing, I'd like to start a conversation. And I warned you, your options are to ask me a question, and we're going to get the cards out, and we're going to trigger some conversations.
So this science that you're doing,
Yes.
now, its basis is to educate, right?
Its basis is to make the world a better place.
Well,
Yep.
but to do that, you have to educate, change people's minds.
Yep.
So are these science experiments really finding out some unknown, or you know what the answer is, and you're just getting people to go through the steps to discover it themselves?
No, very much. We are not presuming we know what the answers. I'm going to put up a diagram just for context here, so we won't lose our place. Excuse me for a moment. And it's the only slide I'm going to use. There we go. So, no, thank you. So the answer is we don't know the answers before we get started. We certainly wouldn't waste our time if we did. I can see where you're coming with that. If we know the answer, then we just cycle back and we get somebody involved so they can discover for self, and then, right. Probably be easier that way, but that's not the way we do it. We're learning. We don't know all the answers. Unfortunately, change is tricky. And even when you know the answer, it can change and be different. So there's so many feedback loops. When you find change, you find it, you think of a way to overcome it or adapt to it, and then you find out it's not a static process. It's a dynamic process, and change is going to be continuous for all of us.
So Don, sorry, go ahead, Ben, sorry.
Okay. I'm really interested in how you laid this out. I was curious to ask how the fact that you're I'll ask this the superintendent sitting right in front of me here, but how does your location inside Acadia National Park affect what you do, help what you do? And so, I mean, in a way, you could do what you're laid out in a location. I mean, you could do it right here. You could do it in a location other than Acadia National Park. But how does the Acadia National Park location make a difference?
Oh, yeah, it's enormous. We could do research someplace else, but not research like we can do now. We are blessed with an amazing facility, which is not nearly as important as our amazing partnership with the Park Service. So we are serving the park, in essence. I just lost it. When I turn, I lose it. So we are serving the park in a sense. The park has issues they want to address. They want to define change. They want to know how it's going to change. They want to know how we could manage that change, how we could adapt to that change. So that's a blessing. They're also, another aspect of this is they are a megaphone. We can shout, if we took this off little Schoodic Institute, we do have 50 people, but we don't have that many scientists. But if we were without the park, we'd be looking for a megaphone. And that's pretty hard to find. We are extraordinarily lucky to have the National Park System working with us, not just Acadia National Park, but moving out to other park systems. So that's a tremendous advantage. So we have built-in challenges that are relevant to a system that is mimicked by lands outside the parks. Right? The parks are not isolated in the sense that ecology stops. So if we figure out problems for the park and solutions for the park and implement things, try them out and find out they work, they're good for the same kind of problem everywhere else. So virtually the world becomes our oyster. Yep.
So is what you're doing just a drop in the bucket when you speak about the massive human population worldwide?
Yes, if we kept it all to ourselves. The communication part is absolutely essential, is to get the word out that, hey, here's a challenge, this is how we solved it. Maybe it's helpful to you. So we do publish in both scientific journals, but more importantly to my mind, we're communicating to the general public. We now have, is she here before I embarrassed her? Catherine. Catherine Schmidt works for us. Catherine Schmidt came from Sea Grant, but you probably know her from hanging out in bookstores. She's written about Acadia's history. She's written the Coastal Companion. So she's an accomplished writer. She can take science and communicate it to broad audiences. So that becomes a megaphone for us. We're getting it out. conferences, the Science Symposium that Acadia has every year is a big way we go to other conferences. We're mixing with scientists and others. We're looking to get that word out. We just talked, I was on the phone this morning, David's here, with David Mansky and Mike Skukup, who used to be with the Park Service, talking about reviving the international short course for people around the world who are trying to protect land, and bringing them in and sharing the techniques and the management approaches that the Park Service is having, and updating that with the changes that have gone on how we manage land now. So we're,
But most of the world is third world, and we don't partake in this.
they do. They have parks. Even the third world has parks. We just read the news that, oh my God, somebody shot 50 elephants in Kenya. But they have parks, and they're all trying to do something. A lot of us have worked in other countries, gone to other countries and helped work with them. And frankly, I found it easier in other countries than I do in the U.S. So, you know, they very quickly get the idea of sustainability. They're living closer to the land. Here in the U.S., we're so separated. Even Whole Foods is not an excuse for not knowing where your food comes from. So, you know, people are like, you know, plenty of food where I go. I don't have to worry about it. Plenty of shelter. But it's different. It's real when it gets there. So, you want to push any more on this?
Oh, I could go on forever.
You can push. Give somebody else. You had
Oh, I was just wondering how you're getting people like lobster fishermen or people that aren't scientists and that maybe don't look at some of the views that other people do
Yep.
In our communities
Yep.
for sustainability.
Yeah, we haven't done a research project with a lobsterman. Somebody else is doing that. We work with clams right now, which is just a way to develop a model. And the way into that was kids. Once you understand that the clams are disappearing, the steamer clams, the way to get into that is kids who needed some assistance with learning. They were, I don't know what the technical term is now, non-traditional kids. They're not less intellectually inclined. They're just the kids, you know, there's always kids in school who would rather sit in the back and don't really participate in classes, and teachers get tired of them, God love them, and look for something else. So we work with kids. It started at Sumner. We work with the students, the non-traditional students, and their teachers that were assigned to them, and the clam wardens, and anybody else in the community who wants to get involved, which was the clammers themselves, and say, look, we understand this is the challenge. Everybody goes, yeah, that is a challenge. That's a problem. We don't know what to do about this either. We're not sure why it's happening. It seems to be a lot of crabs out there that they might be eating it. So people to get together and say, all right, let's define the problem. What's the problem? All right, now that we defined it, in this case, it's these green crabs who came from Europe years ago, and they were safely stayed down in Massachusetts and beyond, and they were good. We're fine up here. All the clamming moved up here. That was good for Maine. Maine clammers started making more money. Massachusetts farmers, clammers not so good. But with warming in the Gulf has warmed 2 degrees. We are the second highest rate of warming in the world. There's one place over in Malaysia somewhere, I believe it is. So that 2 degrees is an enormous difference to the organisms that live in it. And one of the changes was these green crabs that started in Europe, but somehow got here, transported here, just came running up the coast, and they are unbelievable at hoovering up clam spat. So the decision was made to focus on the crabs at a certain time of year when the spat is settling. So working with the kids and the warden and the clammers, the decision was made to start with some netting, get the nets out in the mud flats and see if that helps. And it does help. It's a lot of work, but it does help. So they know that if they can keep the crabs off, they can get the clams back, which is, in my mind, vital in Maine, because clamming is sort of a last-ditch effort sometimes. If there's no other job, you can always get a clam fork and go out and pick up some clams. So that's the model that we're working on. That particular project is going up and down the coast now, and it's time for us to probably step back and go into sharing mode, which is what have we learned? Not just us talking to other towns about it, but talking to the clam warden and talking to the teachers and talking to the kids about and passing that knowledge along so they can try those things. I have a feeling that the clam will continue to evolve. There's ribbon worms out there too, and we don't know what happens when we take care of the crabs to the ribbon worms become a problem. You never know there's always something going on. So that's the model. So that's the one we apply. We're now, we work in forestry. We're working in, Hannah's here, Hannah Weber's here. She directs our marine ecology program, works in the intertidal. One of her focus areas is rockweed, which you've probably been reading about. Just became the property, at least temporarily, of landowners, which changes the whole dynamic, like what happens to rockweed if we start harvesting it or we don't harvest it. So Hannah's along the road of trying to figure out if we alter the intertidal area of the rockweed, have we changed the whole intertidal community? And if we change the intertidal community, does it affect the nearshore water? And if we change the nearshore water, does it change the deeper water? So, and she's using citizen science to move that work along. So, yes.
If you think about the science pillars at Schoodic Institute, and you're obviously addressing the marine ecology pillar right now, could you say something about the other science pillars and the targeted research in those areas?
Yep. So I mentioned forestry. So Dr. Nick Fiscatelli is studying forest ecology change, very much change. He's got some experiments, really interesting experiment going all over the state with, he calls it the common ground. And I remember all these things properly. So there's 8 institutions. There's a repeated experiment. And what's going on, we've already begun to see it, but we want to test and see what's going to happen. Species that normally grow here, we usually plant them as seedlings and as seeds, and stuff that grows south of here, but has the potential for moving north. We're also planting those, and they're all planted side by side in a very tight experiment, and we're following to see which ones grow and which ones don't grow. We're already beginning to see in our forest change in the tree species. And you could say, well, yeah, so we got a different tree. It might be interesting, and it takes so long. The problem with trees is it takes forever, right? You know, most of us will be gone before we notice that the forest has become something else here. But up where we are, we're in that transition zone. We're going into the spruce fir forest, the northern forest. People pay a lot of money to come up there on vacation to see the northern forest. Do we change the park? What happens to the park? The park was set up for the beautiful rocky coastline, but also the particular plant communities are there. Those plant communities are changing. And we're trying to understand what's that change? What's the impact? What ripples out from that? One of the impacts to people directly is that not only are the trees likely to change at the rate the temperature and the precipitation patterns are changing here, but we're going to be blessed with, emerald ash borer moving up through Maine and killing ash trees. We're going to have ticks becoming much more common and carrying nasty diseases, so they're not an inconvenience to pick off our dog and take off our pet like at the end of the day, but not only Lyme disease, but diseases that don't seem to have learned how to live with us and they're killing us before they get to that stage. Like all parasites, they kind of reach an accommodation. It doesn't, if you're a parasite, you don't want to kill your host, then you have to go find a new host. But when you get a new interaction between the host and a parasite, sometimes it goes wrong until they sort out how to live together. So all of that's happening. So a lot of tree work. Bird work. Really exciting time with birds. We've been tracking bird migration in the spring, which is just starting now. All citizen science work. So Seth Benz is our director of bird ecology. So now he's taking groups out before it was fun, he's usually doing bird tours and taking people out to do some birding and collecting data from that. Right now, we get into the first big research area, which is spring warblers, what time they're coming up, how they're doing. That is very much paired with phenology. Phenology is the timing of biological events. So the warblers come up, they're hoping that there's insects here because you have to have protein to produce eggs. And if spring is shifting, it's actually shifting earlier, although it seems to be shifting erratically. And that's a problem too, because the birds get the signal, oh, I usually wait another month, but you know, the weather's right now, so I'm moving north. And they come up and they find out the trees haven't leafed out, so there's no insects. And that, oh my God, it's gonna snow tomorrow. I'm in the wrong place right now. This is not good for me. I'm probably gonna die if I don't find a way to get back out of here. So that's the spring phenology. So it's important to understand not just the birds, counting the birds and when they're coming and when they're leaving, but what's the ramifications when they're here? What, you know, they're part of this whole ecosystem, which, let me circle back and digress for a moment. The scariest part of that report about stating 1 million species may go extinct, we have a hard time even understanding what happens when one species disappears. We don't understand all the connections. Even the best ecologists have no idea. So you could imagine trying to figure out the linkages between 1 million species disappearing. To me, we're in trouble. We don't know what the world will look like at all. If we can't figure out what one species disappearing looks like for the rest of the world, what are 1 million? So we're doing that, the bird work in the spring. He tracks them through the summer. The next big moment is in the fall. And there's two things going on. Over at Cadillac Mountain, they've been doing hawk watches for 25, 50. Somebody might have to catch me on that one. A long, long time. So they've been looking at hawk migration. So they're looking at the time in the migration. They're looking at the number of the birds, trying to get a sense if we still have as many hawks around as should have, or if that population is diminishing. They're also working, looking at ocean birds. So hundreds of thousands of birds migrate right along the coast. And we're looking at those too. And we're relying on other people for data about fish and other prey in the ocean. We're not going to invest deeply in that part of it. Can't do everything. So, was there any other part? Oh, I know. I always forget Emma. So, Emma works for us at the Park Service, and she does an amazing job not only digging out archival stuff, the history, which is really critical. Scientists drool, most scientists drool over, biologists drool over a 50-year-old data set, because that means you have something for comparison. And we have those for the Acadia region. Acadia was basically founded by scientists, right? I mean, I can't tell the story very well, but you know, the academics would come up from Boston or something and say, let's hang out at Bar Harbor. That's a nicer place to be hanging out in the summer. It's too hot and stifling in the city. So they come up here and they do their science up here. I mean, MDI Biolab, right, Jerry?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Here, people were up here. So this had a science origins. And a lot of work was going on. They were, you know, which plants are up here, how they're doing, where do they grow, what animals are up here, where are they hanging out. All of that information was gathered and archived. And now, many years in the future, we get to look at that and go, is it the same thing or has it changed? And if it changed, what was the reason it changed? Hannah has a data set, a Proctor data set, right? So she can look at the intertidal, go back in the intertidal and say, has the intertidal changed up here? We know cod have disappeared for the most part from Frenchman's Bay. So we know some changes. You have to kind of tease that out. Was that overfishing, just overfishing, or was there something else going on? So, but Emma, nonlinear. You have to keep up with me. So Emma works over in the office. She's pulling out all this archival information and making it available to scientists, not just our scientists or the park scientists, but academics anywhere can get access to the stuff and she facilitates, what, 70, 80 permits a year now? Is that right? So people are coming in. This is going to be one of the most studied areas in the world. I mean, a lot is going on here. We have our science fellows that come in every year, second century stewardship. I can talk about that.
Are you doing any research on soil sequestration of carbon dioxide and the effects of biocides turning soil into dirt?
I didn't hear the last part.
Uh,
Sequestration of carbon.
Right?
Right.
And the effects of biocides turning soil into dirt.
Biocides, so I'm not following you. The biocides.
So pesticides, herbicides,
Right.
fungicides can
Right.
be microbiome in
Right.
the soil and therefore preventing
Yep.
sequestration.
We're not. And I don't think we have an intern or a science fellow working on that right now. That's an interesting idea. I should give you a card so you can send me a message so we can slip it into the think tank of what we can do. Is that your background?
I have interest in it, but it's not, I'm retired physician. But
Yeah. Other, yeah, where we're studying, you know, we're maybe got too local. There's not a lot of herbicide, pesticide going on in the park, right? Right. So it hasn't risen to our attention as a serious issue yet for us. Certainly it is for somebody else.
But yet it's a big factor in climate change.
Oh, from the standpoint of sequestration, yeah, sure. Yeah. We're looking at the change. We're not measuring carbon. We leave that to UMaine at the moment and some others. So, which is another area on one of my cards here we need to talk about. Was there another question before I drift off, Jerry?
Sorry, I have a question for you. We touched on the fact that, you know, Schoodic is really unique in terms of its relationship with the park and its location, but I'm curious, are there other models of science institutes being sort of embedded in national parks? And if so, I mean, when we talk about a megaphone, it seems like there would be such a collective voice if all of that was kind of brought together and shared, or, you know, some sort of messaging campaign, if you will.
Yes, there are, of course, you know this better than I do, so I may turn to you for a moment. There's a couple things going on. There are institutes, Teton, Northern Cascades, Glacier, probably another few.
Gateway, New York.
Yeah, the Gateway. Yeah, there are some. A lot of education focus, is that fair? A lot of education focus, some science. There are research learning centers, 18 of those. We're one of them. Schoodic is one of them. And that's a mix of education and research. So there's stuff going on. Yep.
I'm curious, is there a repository somewhere of all the facts you're picking up as you go through your job?
A repository of all the facts and information.
Of information.
Yeah.
Supposing one of us wanted to get into it a little further.
Yeah.
Is there a place we could go? To find
Sure.
some-
Sure. You know, at the first cut, there's stuff on our website, which will change in about a week and be a better website. There's a ton of stuff at the park. What do you call that? It's in the headquarters, but what do you call it? Irma? Yeah, the system, the data. There's, is that the best place to pick up detail? It depends what level you're looking to dive into it.
Yeah.
Right. So, you have on your website, sorry to talking to you. On your website, do you talk about your research at some level?
Yeah, and there's a link to a site that allows, called IRMA, which has very detailed information and papers. That's sort of like the technical.
Is it a cumulative accomplishment? And are you putting together what you've learned last year or the year before together with this, so that there's a sense of development?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite that well organized like what you're describing. I think these papers get produced, they get published, and so it takes someone to kind of synthesize all of them and all of that discrete information,
Right.
which
Yeah.
to some extent we're doing and Schoodic is doing in various forms.
Yeah. Everything at the park needs a permit. and those permits require a report every year. So that information is accumulating. I agree, we haven't quite got a system that makes it easily accessible all the time yet, but we're working towards it. So,
But I think that's a real priority that we've, that kind of Don was alluding to, is this idea of like communicating science, and science, it's really important to do that effectively.
right,
We're moving into a better understanding of the climate. And what you're doing obviously has implications.
Mhm.
And it's just a question of how it all fits together and what, if anything, some of us can do.
Yes, the practical part. Right, yeah. Yes, so we are trying to make sure that information is available, but we don't spend a lot of our time on the practical part. We try to communicate it and turn it over to other groups that are focused on that part. So this is probably a good time to talk about partnership. You know, we would need many hundreds of scientists, and we don't have many hundreds. So partnership is critical to us. Obviously, the most critical partnership is with the park scientists at Acadia, scientists throughout the national park system. We're tapped in now to DC and that level where higher level decisions can be made. Second century stewardship is bringing into the proximity of the park. Second century stewardship was a program that's piloted here. It started when it rolled over from the first 100 years of the park to the second 100 years. Probably a number of you were here when that happened for the celebrations. So that program is very much illustrates this idea of tying things together instead of just going off and being a scientist or just being an educator or just being a communicator. So that program starts with science fellows, and people compete every year to come to this park and conduct science. They apply, they tell us what they're thinking they'd like to do, we make a judgment, and we pick 3 of them a year. We give them a stipend, put them up, and they do research. They are asked, as a requirement, to take communication training, science communication training. Scientists are taught to write journal articles. We teach them to communicate with everybody. And that's been extremely successful. We're doing the next one in July. But that's a great way to get scientists to do social media and write in plain English. And we're finding out that the scientists, once you help them get over that hump and break the jargon barrier, they get really excited about it because people start reaching back to them, particularly in social media. All of a sudden, all these people are interested in what they're doing and they're talking to them. And what could be more fulfilling? At the end of the day, it's not about the paper, you know, unless you're dealing with a dean who says publish or get out. But at the end of the day, none of us most of us aren't doing this for the journal article. We're doing it because we chose a path that was fascinating to us but fulfilled us. You know, none of us are, if you know Maslow's hierarchy, where, you know, at the bottom, I need something to eat, I need a shelter, but at the top is fulfillment. And most of us have the luxury of worrying about fulfillment. Did I have a good day today? Did I make the world a better place? Do I feel like I can sleep that I've done my bit? That's what we're in science for. That's what we're in education for. That's what we're in communication for. We're trying to get to that spot. And that science communication training not only gets the word out to everybody so that everybody's broadcasting it and we don't have to talk to every individual. That's the beauty of social media. There are lots of downsides with social media, but that's the beauty of it. You can spread the word widely and loudly pretty quickly. So that's going on. And then they're obligated to interact with interpretive and education staff. So we're getting this into how the park is communicating. And we'll even push it outside the park to teachers if they're interested in bringing it into their curriculum. There's our Teachers Fellows program too, right? So we're getting it not only to the people in the park who we're talking to 3+ million people here, and once this takes throughout the nation, that means we may be capturing 300 million+ people. So there's the megaphone. That's the beauty of working with the National Park Service, beyond we love the people. But That's an enormous megaphone. So we're getting that out. And then the last piece of this program is what if we just don't know where to begin on this, is we get people together, we bring scientists in, we bring any stakeholders in that are relevant to the problem, get them together and start talking about this and go, well, let's define the problem, let's frame up a way to move forward on this. So what spurred me to go this direction was the data, believe it or not, circling back. Big data is a giant problem for everybody. It's a problem for the lab too, right? Big data is a problem. There's so much data accumulating. Managing it, sharing it, it needs to be nurtured. And it's enormously costly to do that. And that is a hurdle nobody in the world who uses data has figured out yet. Microsoft has jumped into the fray. GIS, who's the GIS firm? Thank you. Yes, they're working at it. People are working at it, but so far we're not used to having distributed systems and having everybody in it. That's the other problem. We could open this up so everybody plays their role with the data, but then everybody wants to share it. That means you'd have to be in my system. I don't want you in my system because you might mess up my data, so it becomes a people problem. So this is one of those enormous challenges that people are still working on. We had it as a symposium at AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, last year to try to address that kind of problem, which, as you can imagine, goes beyond scientists to, computer geeks and all kinds of people that like other stuff. So an enormous issue. And there are other issues like that, too, within the biological realm. So, yes?
Don, go back to partnerships a minute and bring it kind of close to home. Can you give us any update, or if you want to defer to maybe Hannah should, but in terms of what Frenchman Bay Partners is doing now, what Schoodic Institute's role in that is, and perhaps I know the biolab's part of that too. What's going on currently with Frenchman Bay Partners?
Hannah, do you mind?
Frenchman Bay Partners will have their annual meeting on Wednesday in the Ellsworth Public Library in the Riverview Room. You're all welcome to come. Plug for the annual meeting of Frenchman Bay Partners.
What are the priority projects?
Our priorities are soft sediment or benthic anadromous fish. Rockweed is actually a conservation target. And I'm now going to blank on the last two, but there are two more. So anadromous fish, soft sediment benthic, rockweed.
Eelgrass?
Eelgrass, thank you. Yes, so Frenchman Bay Partners is active. Anyone who doesn't know, it is a partnership for people around Frenchman Bay or other stakeholders who are interested in having a healthy ecological and economic region. It's all focused on the bay itself. How can we keep it healthy, and how can we keep the communities around it healthy as well? Still active, still going. We are looking for a new president. Did I mention the annual meeting on Wednesday? Public Library. So thank you for the question. Very active.
Thanks, Anna.
So partnerships. So I would say the two that are, well, there's several. We have a partnership with Earthwatch. If you're familiar with Earthwatch, or an organization that's been around for a long time, and you pay to be a volunteer on an expedition. So we're happy to be working with them. We are working with, we have, I think about it, we got all kinds of things going on. For education, we have environmental living and learning for Maine students. We're deep into that. We're now engaged with a new education group called Nature-Based Education Consortium, which we are the fiscal agents for, which means we got them started because they don't have any status yet. So we're helping them get started and working with them on what exactly we're going to try to tackle, but that has the potential to be hugely impactful. It not only includes residential, outdoor education, environmental education, but day camps in the schools, but outdoor recreation, which, to be cynical strategically, is critical in this state. If we want to have an impact and we want the state to be interested in this group and get outdoor education, environmental education, we need to bring in every stakeholder group that can help do that. So that's getting off the ground. National Park Foundation is becoming someone we're working with now on second century stewardship. They are congressionally mandated philanthropic arm of the Park Service. I believe I was accurate in that, right? So they are the group. They raise nationally, which is part of the reason we're getting together, because we're going to do some campaigning together, some financial campaigning together. And just last Friday, most recent, not the first visit, but we are working with the University of Maine very closely on a number of things. We have a class at our facility now for this first 3 days of this week. They come every year, use this as a classroom. They send techs, they send interns to work with us. We are talking to them about a shared professorship. So the Institute and UMaine would, in a cross-disciplinary venture. UMaine, I'm a big fan of UMaine. We have been talking to people up there that are crossing the boundaries, which is something we like to do, and I'll get to that in a second. But so we're working with one group on this shared professorship, which has written and received the dean's blessings, so we're moving full steam ahead. We're also talking to the George Mitchell Center, who have a nice National Science Foundation grant for training. They're crossing boundaries too. So what does that mean to be crossing boundaries? One of the other realities in my world is that, I'll give you two realities that shape where I'm coming from. I spoke about buying land, regulation, education. All good, but haven't got us there. To my mind, there's two things that need to be happening. We need to think of this problem differently. It's not, the old way was to be knowledge workers, where you went to school and you learned how to do something to get to an end. So that collects a lot of groups. That includes lawyers, doctors. You know, that's the way they used to work. But it encompasses many other professions. I learned it, I do it, I keep doing it, I keep doing it, and I keep doing it. Well, the world's much too complicated right now for that. What we need is creativity and innovation. What we need are skills of people who can look at a problem and pull from different places and try to create something new out of it. It's a heuristic approach to it. And then the other piece of this for me is boundaries. I'm going to slip in another thing that was on my cards here. This is working out pretty well. I haven't had to put a card in your face, and we're still getting there. So boundaries, what am I talking about? When they say boundaries, we're crossing disciplines, and I put that even farther out. It came years ago down in DC. People were trying to convert some science into policy. But I've blown that up and gone much more than just organizations crossing over, but individuals crossing over too. And it's not just crossing disciplines anymore. So one thing that we do is we mix, I told you we mix our science with other sciences. We mix sciences of different types with education. We mix education with communication. We're going right across the board. So we're constantly looking for partners who can complement, who can challenge us to do those kinds of things. And that's where the big breakthroughs come through. I think you probably already know that. The big breakthroughs come through when people spill something and it mixes chemicals, or you know, they got something else growing in their Petri plate than they thought they were going to get. And that's the same way people are going to have to go forward from here. If we're going to figure out all these changes and beat back the threats and figure out better ways to have energy to power our homes, but without destroying the planet, then we're going to have to be more creative. And it can't be just, well, this was the way we did it before. We're going to have to keep coming up with new ways. So at Schoodic, that's where we're going. We're mixing people together. We're getting different disciplines. We're trying to come up with new ideas and be innovative about the way we go forward. It just has to be that way. So boundaries is a weird word because To be a boundary organization means you're actually breaking the boundaries. You're breaking them down. I don't know why they call it boundaries. They just didn't want to have two words. But that's what it is. Boundary organizations break down boundaries. And it applies in my world to individuals as well. You can teach yourself to be boundary crossing. And we need to do it. So, next. Yes.
A very simple question, speaking of boundaries. You've referred to a few key personnel in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
If they would be willing to stand up and say who they are, because
Sure.
we can't see them, they would be...
Sure.
Stand up.
I'll start first. I'm Kevin Schneider. I'm the superintendent at Acadia National Park, so obviously we work closely.
I thought everybody knew you.
We're from away.
You got to get out from more. That's all. And Hannah Weber.
Hi, I'm Hannah Weber. I'm the Marine Ecology Program Director at Schoodic Institute. We met last year.
You kept your mouth quiet, David. There's a lot of people
I'm
associated with us.
David Mansky. I'm on the board of the Schoodic Institute.
And a lifelong park employee
Former
before
park
this. Former park employee. There's lots of familiar faces in this room. Emery's. So this is a nice community. People get to know each other pretty quick.
Thank you.
You're welcome over anytime you want. Come on over. We'll talk with you. So,
That's great.
any other questions, or am I supposed to wrap it up? Or?
Yeah, I think we're good. We're at the hour mark. But Don, thanks.
Oh, can I say one more thing? I just want to blow your mind with one more thing. Art. We do art. Why the heck would we do art? We have a great facility. We want to share it with the world. Art inspires, and our landscape inspires art. I look at art as a great way to communicate. It's a communication channel. Some people learn from art. Some people get caught up in nature and think of the beauty of it when they see a photograph or a painting. We welcome artists. We're glad to have them. So, and I'll quit.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. So those of you that know MDIBL a little bit, you probably saw a lot of synergy there, right? In some of the programs, some of the approaches that we take to solving some of these big challenges that we face. Although most of our research focuses on human health and disease, there is a long history of environmentally focused research here. And I was thinking as Don was talking, a year ago, we were cleaning out one of the older labs. For those of you that don't know, the biolab is 121 years old this year, so we've been here for a while. We're gearing up for a big 125th celebration, but we were cleaning out one of the older labs, and we came across this old wooden box. It's about 2 feet long, and it's full of index cards where they did ecological surveying of, and every day, I mean, it goes back to the early 20s. And all this information, so I should share that with somebody because I'm sure it's sitting in my office at the moment, which is really not a good place for it to be. So yeah, there's a lot of that, shared history. Many of you may be familiar with a guy named William Proctor who was here as a scientist in the 20s. And he did the first comprehensive ecological survey of Mount Desert Island. I think there are 3 or 4 volumes in this. 5. Oh, 5. Well, I only have 3, so somewhere they got lost. But, there is that really strong connection to place and to environment. And so it's a fun thing to think about, how we might sort of utilize that information and data to inform some of these present day problems. So thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you in June when we start our next Science Café, which will be given by Christy Townsend from the University of Maine. Christy was a student here a number of years ago and now has a assistant professor position at the University of Maine. So we're excited to hear about some work that she's doing to develop a better sensory test for neuropathy, so diabetic neuropathy, so nerve regeneration. That's kind of an exciting topic.
We work with you.
Yes.
We're doing a project on arsenic.
Ah, yeah,
lab.
right.
Jane Disney's project. She's looking at another National Science
Yes,
Foundation grant. She has citizen science projects going all over the state, working on testing well water.
Right.
Kids doing this and adults. Testing well water for arsenic, and our role is evaluating.
Yep.
Evaluating the feedback we're getting and what people are learning from it.
Yeah, so I mean, Don was talking about one of the challenges in science these days is to deal with these large data sets, right? It's a discipline in and of itself. And a big part of the education programs that we have here at the BioLab are to help students be able to be literate in looking at these big data sets. In fact, we do 2 or 3 international courses where we bring 25 students at a time to really sit with the leaders in the field, because especially, certainly environmental data is the same thing, but with biological data, and you're talking about whole genomes, you're looking at just billions of pieces of information. And so it's a real skill to be able to interpret that in a way that is consistent and meaningful. What are you seeing in this data? So we're actually teaching the students that are involved in this arsenic collection program how to interpret the data that they're gathering. And I think as science, as this sort of big data generation goes forward, that's going to be an incredibly important skill, whether you're working for a company doing marketing and looking at all this consumer data, or if you're in science and want to be able to pull key pieces of information. So it's definitely part of the future, and we're excited to play a little role in that. So, and Jane will be here giving a Science Café in early July, to talk about that program with Bruce Stanton, who's from the Dartmouth Toxic Superfund site. So they'll be sharing that with you. But thank you all so much. We'll see you next month.